Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It's Matty Hewitt and Joe Ramage here from We Are Sunderland. Our new site is now live. If you haven't checked it out already, be sure to head over there, see what we're doing, see what we're all about. You can take advantage of our launch offer, which is obviously just £1 for the first 6 months of coverage. We're in partnership with the Sunderland Fan Museum. Where should we start, Joe? I mean, Ipswich Town defeat at the weekend. What did you make of it?
It was another frustrating one, wasn't it, really? What threatened to be potentially the perfect sort of tonic to that Newcastle game ended up being another really disappointing afternoon in the end. And it was, I think the way that it happened as well, didn't it? The second half was the one that left a lot to be desired. You know, the winning goal, as it turned out, a set piece. Something that's been eradicated. You know, defensively, they've been quite solid in recent weeks since Michael Beale came in. But that one was a real sort of kick in the teeth, wasn't it? You know, unmarked. Michael Beale said it across all of his sort of media duties. You know, smallest man on the pitch. He was the one who found space to head in. But it was just a strange one from the off, wasn't it? I think the real talking point was obviously the decision not to start Nazir Irusin. Obviously went with Abdullah Bar. Now, there's two trains of thought to this, because naturally I think all of us were kind of sitting there thinking, why would you not start Rusin? Based on the fact that he scored in that last league game against Preston. Obviously, he kept him in against Newcastle, but against Preston, that was where you've got to build on the confidence from that. So to not start him when you've been waiting for a striker to get up and running all season seems strange. But then, as the way certainly the first half played out, it wasn't actually a bad decision, because Sunderland were more than competitive and perhaps even shaded the first half. You know, they went 1-0 up and they had a couple of good chances. You know, Jack Clark, before he scored, by his standards, probably should have done a bit better, shouldn't he? And before that, Joe Bellingham as well, you know, with a real good chance. So in that sense, it almost worked. And we saw it at Hull, didn't we? That kind of set up, certainly out of possession with the front four. But the second half is where it got away from him, and then the substitutes came on. Obviously, the supporters in the away end chanting that we want a striker, and you can see that frustration as well, and it is starting to come out the more and more that we get into the season, and the same problems that are happening. Obviously, it turned out Al-Sheesh, he was the one who missed the opportunity, and it just ended up being a really frustrating afternoon as well. I don't know what you thought of it.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, I've got a bit that's going out later on the site later today, just on that sort of out of shape, how they look. And, you know, I have been impressed from that side of things on frustrating. I think away from home, we've seen, you know, early signs of what the plan is. At home, have we seen that? It's going to have to be a different approach entirely, isn't it? We saw first half against Preston, like a free-flowing Sunderland side that we've been like accustomed to, certainly since Tony Mowbray, you know, took the reins. I don't think we've maybe had enough games at home. You can say the same about Way, to be fair. I don't think we've had enough of a barometer to judge him on. On the game itself, I'd agree with you. I think first half, he's certainly very, very unlucky to go in at the break with a scores level. I mean, Pierre was done well to block a pass going out wide, and it's just poked it through to Caden Jackson, who scored. But there you go. That's what happens when you've got a striker on the pitch in one sense who's, you know, just right place, right time. I agree with you. You know, the Rusin one was a strange one. Again, I don't think it particularly made much of a difference first half. Sunderland did still create chances, but again, that's something that I touch on in the article that I've got going out later today. Is for all Sunderland look pretty solid. That's what the third, Jack Clark's third, just over the festive period of where he's had to get them out of jail. Rotherham, that's, you know, just looking at that XG, it's one of the worst of a visiting side so far this season. And even then, Jack Clark got them out of jail there. That was a massive deflective effort. But it's interesting that it feels, you know, I think everybody knows it was going to be a bit of a tough ask to come away from there with 3 points. Only Leeds United have won there. But on the first half performance, I think, you know, they were there. Ipswich we've had plenty of injuries. They felt like they were there to be got at, and that's probably the major disappointment. And I know it's been a bit of a theme the past couple of weeks. Dan Neil, I spoke with him afterwards and said he doesn't think he's been in a game where the ball's gone out of play that many times, and that's been the major disappointment. Just from me looking back at the past couple of games, has been sloppiness in possession. How do you eradicate that? Because it's not necessarily like drills. It's just sort of concentration. Is it because of the age of the squad? It's one of those, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what you make of it. Just on that in particular, it's been frustrating, hasn't it?
It's interesting as well, though. I think we sort of touched on it on the way back home, didn't we? That I don't know what Sunderland are at the moment.
Yeah.
If you were to try and label how they set up into like as an approach, are they attacking front foot team? Are they a counter attacking team? Are they possession based? Are they sitting back? It's hard to try and decipher now. I know again it is a small sample of games where Michael Beale's been in, but we're kind of just dipping into little bits of it and not getting the most out of either one of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I certainly think, like you said, as we'll get over a larger pool of games, we'll certainly see more of that.
And ultimately, like what you touched on, if you think of his time in charge, the goals that Sunderland have scored, it was a Jack Clark sort of solo strike at Hull, Jack Clark deflection down at Rotherham, Alex Pritchard with a wonderful strike to open the scoring against Preston. The second goal against Preston is obviously Jack Clark with a wonderful run on the counter.
There's a common theme here, isn't there?
And then Jack Clark again on Saturday with another great strike. That is where the worry comes in. It's the chances, and you touched on it, the XG's dropping, the chances created are dropping, attempts at goal are dropping. It feels as though it's kind of all just getting stifled a little bit. He's setting up certainly away from home against Hull, and on Saturday it is a little bit more defensive. But is that negating the opportunities that they're creating without a striker in any case? Yes, that is, and that is not going to help you try and get results in the end, is it?
Yeah, I certainly think away from home, like you've said, I don't think there's anything majorly wrong with doing that, particularly at the likes of Hull and Ipswich. Rotherham, when I've looked at that, it's a bit of an anomaly, isn't it? It's a weird one. They sat with 10 men or so behind the ball when Sunderland had it. Sunderland didn't really operate with that 4-2-4 out of possession. They just looked a bit void of ideas. They're in a bit, I think they need fresh bodies in January, ultimately. I mean, again, we said it on the way home. You've got a midfield three of Dan Neil, Pierre, Job. I think Dan Neil was excellent again. I just think there needs to be a little bit of rotation in there. Jay Matty coming back might be, another body to put in there. We've not really seen him get a run of games, see what he's like. But I just think that there needs to be something, different. I've touched on it again. Could Luke O'Nien, just conversations we've had, could Luke O'Nien step forward, act as a holding midfielder and allow the other two to go on to play? Then you can bring in the likes of Jensen Sealed, who's look okay. I just think sometimes, Sunderland have a lot of continuity in certain areas of the pitch, and then other areas there seems to be, I don't know, just a lot of chopping and changing, particularly up front. The central areas of the pitch, the core that they've had has stayed the same, but there's one or two positions where you're just thinking, do they need help? Is that going to come in January, or do players just need a bit of a run of games to boost some confidence?
Yeah, the midfield one's interesting, isn't it? I think, for as much as the talk is about a striker, and rightly so, that midfield position is key as well, because Dan Neil and Pierre were they're it, really, aren't they? Jamie Tete was back in the squad. I think that was the first time he's been in a Sunderland squad for over a year, obviously on loan at Plymouth, then the injury. But that role, even in behind them, or to allow one of them to move further forward, like you said, just to mix things up, maybe to give Job a bit of a rest, because he's probably the only one out of the summer signings. I think they made 11 summer signings, and he's pretty much the only one who is regularly featuring. Out of the rest of them, I think it's Mason Burstow who's got the next most minutes. In that's about 13 appearances, 8 starts, but less than 600 minutes. Nothing. That then goes to the recruitment side of things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Was the recruitment ultimately good enough in the summer? If the recruitment team, Kevin Louis Dreyfus, Christian Speakman, they're coming out and they're saying that the top two was the aim. You would have to say isn't at the moment, because there's a gap there now. Granted that the standard has improved this year with the teams who've come down, but it just feels a little bit. It feels as though they're going to be in a real big fight this year to get in the playoffs, because they've already lost. I think that was the 11th game that they've lost this season. They only lost 13 last season. But outside of the bottom three, I think there's only another 3 teams who've lost more than them. So it's a little bit worrying. It's easy to sort of overhype things and overreact, but there is a little bit of concern creeping in over the last sort of 6 weeks. Since Mowbray's exit, it has thrown out one or two questions that certainly remain unanswered, and these next 2 weeks over the remaining of the transfer window are huge. I know you can say that in every transfer window, and we've said it on this pod before, but it feels especially important, coupled with them home games, that things just turn a little bit and just to uplift the mood, because it just feels really, with the fans chanting that on Saturday, it's like we said at the start of this show, it's the first sort of sign of real outpouring where there is a frustration coming and the fans are voicing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, I don't know. I wasn't amongst the fans, so I'm not sure how much of that was aimed at Beale to get a striker on the pitch. He did, got 2 on there, but again, what can? There was very little that they could do. Both of them, to be fair, didn't really have an impact. I think it was just the stage that the game was at. Ipswich had a real foothold in the game at that point. Was it aimed more directly at Speakman and co?
The interesting thing is, if Alsheesh scores that to put them in front again, then we probably aren't having this conversation, are we? It's such fine margins, and that is where things are a little bit catastrophised with Beale as well. He's been caught up in, obviously, the Newcastle stuff that went on. He's been caught up in the midst of that, and some people are not necessarily on board with his appointment. Results are the things that are going to help him, and to lose that one, I think it's the first time that they've lost from a winning position this season. Those things, and like I said, with the XG and the shots at goal, just the attacking output is just dropping off a little bit. Maybe to boost the defence, like we said, but you need to try and strike that balance before things threaten to sort of escape and get away from them a little bit this season, because they can quickly, given how tight it is.
Yeah, there's plenty of things that play into that as well, though, isn't there? Like level of opposition. You've come up against Newcastle. You're playing against teams that are in and around you. All right, your XG at Hull wasn't monumental. It didn't blow anybody out the water, but it was still, on the face of things, it was a good away performance. If you'd come away from Ipswich with a point, I think you sat there looking, going, good away performance. I mean, I feel like it was just. It's easy to write off and say it was just one of those games, but in part, you look at the league, you look at the results. That risks becoming a common theme, or it was just one of those games. How many just one of those games are you going to have? Because at the minute, like you say there, that was the 11th defeat. It's, they're still in touch. They're not a million miles off, and they are still well within. They're not far off being a really good team. It's just, I think that's the frustrating part, is how close they are, and I think everybody knows that, how close they are. Just to go back to your recruitment thing, I think they need a little something, just a little different to change the game. That was notable. Look at the players that Ipswich brought off the bench. They were players that could change games. The problem with the recruitment, in my point of view, has been the very, very similar type of players, all technically very good. We haven't really seen it from the 4 strikers because just of how often they've flitted and changed. I think they just need a slightly different approach. They've touched on the model. There's been a lot said about it, hasn't there, in recent weeks. Beale said in his press conference, it's not about recruiting young players. It's now about, recruiting the right type of character. And I don't think hasn't been the model. I just think the last transfer window, if you're judging it off that alone, they've invested heavily in younger players. And as you say, Joe Bellingham has been the mainstay in that starting 11. When you've lost the likes of Danny Bart, Lyndon Gooch, experienced heads at championship level, all right, you've had the likes of Troy Hume step into Gooch's position at right back, Ballard in 09, but you just, there would be a little bit of rotation, I think, there in that position. If you had Danny Bart and Ballard, or you'd play, you might see a back 3. We're yet to see that. Beale's hands tied slightly with the squad that he's got. Don't get me wrong, it was exactly the same for Tony Mowbray. His hands were tied. I just think, again, we're not expecting, them to go out and sign someone with grey hair, the championship winner, all that sort of thing. It's just, I think it's glaringly obvious what's needed. And I think the club are aware of that. It's just, how do they address that? We're at the midway point in January now, and time is ticking. There's no need to panic yet. Plenty of way to go, but that's where they're at, and it's tough at the moment for fans watching on.
I think the problem is as well that it's felt as though that's been the case certainly for 12 months.
Mm.
You know, these areas have needed addressing certainly for that amount of time. You know, you go back to last January, Ross Stewart going down injured. This was after Ellis Sims had gone back to Everton. They already needed one striker then. I know Joe Gellar came in. We know how that played out. They still left themselves short then. It continued in the summer. The central midfield option then as well, with Corey Evans going out injured, who's obviously still out. So these have been issues that certainly a year long in the making. You could probably make a case to go back to the summer previous to that as well, where certainly on the striker front, it might have been one short as well. But then you can argue on the flip side, when are you going to, if you bring four in like what they did, albeit young lads, you need to give them a run of games. And at the minute, they're not getting that. Now, again, that's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because if you give them a couple of starts and they don't do it, how long do you persist with them?
Exactly, yeah.
So it is real. It's a really tough one. I just wonder what you made of Michael Beale's comments on that when he sort of suggested that he did start a striker in Job. Do you see that as him as a striker, or is that kind of protecting him, or just wondering just how you saw that?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I think the generation that we are now in, probably thanks to Pep Guardiola, you've got players who aren't just out and out number 9. Of course, you're still going to get that, but take Rico Lewis, for example, right back, can play centre midfield. That extends to everywhere, the Championship. Luke O'Nien, example, centre half. Now is his position, has played at right back, central midfield. You're going to get these types of players who are versatile, and that's probably testament to Job's ability, that he is versatile in those areas. From what I've seen of him so far this season, I do think he's been better in a more offensive role as a number 9. We haven't really seen him in a number 10. He does look good when his runs from midfield, from deep. He does have an intelligent attacking brain to do that. I just think, I don't know, are we sort of penning players down into those type of roles? Yes, you do have those type of players like Jack Clark, left winger. He's played there all year. But I do think, it's hard, isn't it? Just tread cautiously with that type of thing. I mean,
what I did notice, we both pointed out, didn't we, that we haven't seen too much this season with Job up there. There was a couple of times he did make that sort of run in behind, and they did look to go direct. Yeah. And that is, like I say, that is one of the first times that we've seen Sunderland try and do that, just a different way to approach the game rather than side to side and build through the thirds. And that was what resulted in Clark's first chance, where he might have done better. So
it's just
you look
a focal point, isn't it? It's just having a focal point. Like, you look, all right, Jordan Hugill didn't score if we go back to the Rotherham game, but he absolutely ran Sunderland defenders ragged in the first half. He used his physicality, his frame. I'm not saying to go out and buy like a Jordan Hugill type player, but if you can, like an Ellis Sims, they are in need of a focal point, whether that's a willing runner in behind, something a little bit different. They just haven't quite got. I don't think they know what they're after in that sense. In the sense of, from the summer, the players that they've recruited, they are very similar. Hamir's slightly bigger. Maybe they thought he was a bit more of a Ross Stewart type, physical frame, willing runner. Hasn't really been given the opportunity. It's interesting. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, it goes, like you go back to saying that they've signed so many similar players. When we started the conversation on Barr, didn't we? Him coming back in. Where would you say his best position is? He sort of played right the way across the front four, if you like. Credit to him, I actually thought he did okay on Saturday. He did really well for the goal as well, didn't he? And he was probably unfortunate to come off. But it's just, he's gone through the middle. He's been number 10. He's been on the right. And that's been the case, hasn't it? You know, Alshish come on. He's been in all three of them as well, I think.
They do need to Barr as well. Sorry to interrupt. I think defensively Barr offered a lot more, perhaps, that went unnoticed as well at Ipswich, just going backwards. I felt like he stifled the runs of Leif Davis, and you've seen how, all right, he got another assist from a set piece, but you've seen how dangerous he is. I think that was his 10th, was it, for the season? It's one of those.
It's just frustrating, isn't it? And you can so understand the fans' frustration because, like you said, they're not far away, and the atmosphere around the club at the minute, it's almost as though the world's caving in. When, if you take a step back, it's not, because they're not far away. They are still in and around that playoff positions, and you know that is probably going to be the case for the rest of the season. But it does also feel as though, like we reiterate, that they have to get something right in this January window in terms of shoring that up to make sure that it doesn't slip away, because it can. And just finding goals from it, because you know the Clark stuff's not going to go away, is it? You know, if you look at the whole game, if that was not to go Sunderland's way, then you go into the final week, would somebody come in and just try and test the waters with him? You know, I think it came out that I think we would all expect him to leave in the summer anyway if Sunderland don't get promoted. But if it gets towards the end of the window and there's sort of 2 defeats in these home games coming up, all hypothetical, of course, then you wonder, would someone test the waters? What would they do? Would they be forced to sell? There's so many sort of things that are spinning plates at the moment, and it is difficult. They just need to try and settle down and sort of settle on where your forward's going to be. Either bring one in or pick one and really try and stick and give them a go. And Rusyn is the one who's scored, so for me, he should be the one who gets that run.
I certainly think this week leading up to the Hull City game alone, I mean, we'll be speaking with Michael Beale later in the week. I certainly think leading up to the whole game, if they can bring in one before then, there hasn't been any suggestion yet that it's all pretty quiet. But if they can bring in one before then, you would like to think, you know, that would give the mood a little bit of a lift heading into what's a massive game at home, and you've got to win your home games, let alone against promotion rivals, if you're serious about finishing in that top 6.
Yeah, and I think it's as well, like, I know that we talk about the model this, the model that. You just wonder if, because we're halfway through, you know, you see an Ipswich go out and make two signings. You know, I think it was the midfielder, wasn't it? I've forgotten what his name is now. Davis in the middle. Travis, sorry. He was making his debut, and he'd already played 20-odd games for Blackburn this season. You know, they've gone out, they've approached that, and they've known who they wanted to get in to fill a gap in the squad. Sunderland, it's as though it feels like there's still work ongoing, right? So have they been as prepared as what we would have hoped for them to have been coming into the window? Obviously not, because there's nobody through the door, and it's all a little bit quiet at the minute for a January, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it'll certainly be interesting. I mean, heading into the final stages of the window, we'll be all over that and bringing you know, the news from the Stadium of Light. So again, just one final plug before we call it a day. As again, you know, We Are Sunderland's now live, place to be for everything red and white, tactical analysis, expert opinion. We heard from Kieran Brady last week. He's one of our guest columnists. We should have another one later to announce during the week, but we'll let your minds race as to who that could be. You can subscribe for £1 for just 6 months. Sponsored by the Fans Museum, and head over to We Are Sunderland just to check us out.